In one quaint town, life was usually a leisurely affair. I, James Anderson, had lived in a picturesque corner of the world all my life, and I had no idea that one day I would be the protagonist of a story as complicated as the one I was about to tell. It was a crisp fall morning, the kind that invigorates with the promise of a new day. I had just hit the road in my automobile, an old but reliable car that I had taken countless trips on winding roads. As I drove down one of the narrow lanes, surrounded on both sides by ditches, I noticed something unusual up ahead. My attention was drawn to an abandoned passenger car parked clumsily beside the highway. The sight was perplexing, and I couldn't help but notice a man standing next to the car. The man, who appeared to be holding a baby in his arms, was frantically waving his hand, asking for help. Concerned, I pressed myself against the curb, ready to lend a hand. After all, for me, helping a stranger is a common thing. As I approached the stranded car, my heart pounding with curiosity and anxiety, I couldn't help but notice how eerily quiet it became. The familiar sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling gave way to an almost surreal silence. The man with the baby looked confused, his face partially obscured by the child he held in his arms. "Thank goodness you stopped," she exclaimed in a trembling voice. "Our car broke down and we're stuck here and we have no one to turn to. Please could you give us a ride to the nearest town?" I hesitated for a moment, my instincts warning me of possible danger. But compassion took over, and I nodded. "Sure, I can give you a ride. Hop in." As they approached the car, I felt a growing unease. Their behavior was erratic, and something about the situation didn't sit well with me. But before I could react, the unexpected happened. From all sides, as if out of thin air, people materialized and surrounded my car with surprising speed. It was a surreal sight, like a scene from a thriller. Panic gripped me as I realized the ominous truth: they had set up this whole situation to trap me. Before I could react or try to defend myself, they pounced on my car, overpowering me with brute force. Fear froze in my veins as I realized they had me cornered. The man I was trying to help suddenly revealed his true nature, his face contorted in a sinister grin. Amidst the chaos and struggle, I saw his hand reach for the ignition switch of my car. In a quick and practiced motion, they started the engine and drove off, leaving me in the middle of nowhere, dazed and broken. My mind flashed through my mind as my car and the man who had lured me into this trap disappeared into the distance. It all happened so fast, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The realization that I had been robbed and my beloved car stolen hit me like a freight train. Stunned and disoriented, I managed to pull myself together and at the first opportunity to report the incident to the police. I meticulously described the events of that fateful fall morning, hoping that justice would be swift and my car would be recovered. Days turned to weeks, and I found myself in a frenzy of uncertainty, waiting for news from the authorities. The whole place was buzzing with gossip, and it was only then that I started hearing disturbing stories from other people who had fallen victim to similar schemes on these very roads. It turned out that this was a common occurrence on the roads. A network of criminals operated in the shadows, using the goodwill and kindness of residents for their own sinister purposes. Worse is when spikes and splinters have been placed on the road, so that your car tires are punctured and you have absolutely no way to get out. There have been cases where people have died because of cars flipping over after a tire blowout. Criminals keep stealing all the belongings of the injured passengers, including cell phones. More often than not, the severely injured die because they are unable to seek help. Days have turned into months and my car is still not located, and criminals continue to elude the law. Samantha and her friend Emily were on a road trip through the beautiful California landscape. The sun had dropped below the horizon, casting long shadows on the winding highway, and it was about 10 o'clock when Samantha glanced at the fuel gauge. They needed to get gas right away and find a place to stay for the night. Samantha was always cautious, so she began to look around for a safe, well-lit gas station. Finally, her eyes stopped on what she thought was the perfect spot. It was a brightly lit gas station, clean and busy. The station was decorated with neon lights piercing the night, and many cars clustered around the pumps. With a sigh of relief, Samantha drove into the station and stopped at the only open pump in the center. Getting out of the car, Samantha walked towards the gas station, listening to her surroundings. The cool night air was saturated with the smell of gasoline. She started to unscrew the gas tank cap as her heart suddenly raced. A scream rang out. In the still night, terrified, Samantha looked up and saw a man with a gun, accompanied by a group of menacing-looking men. In a panic, she realized something was wrong. She cast a quick glance at the other cars but found them all empty. Then it dawned on her that they had unwittingly fallen into a trap set for anyone entering the central pump. The man with the gun began giving orders, anger audible in his voice. He demanded that Samantha get on the ground, and his threats against Emily were even more horrifying. His words held promises of oppression and unspeakable actions if they did not obey immediately. Emily, frozen with terror, remained locked in the car. Samantha's heart raced as she quickly assessed the situation. With trembling hands, she fumbled for the gas tank cap in her pocket and begged the armed man to let her talk to Emily, so she could get out of the car and comply with his demands. To her surprise, he agreed and allowed Samantha to get into the car. Inside, Samantha found Emily in a state of shock, tears streaming down her face. Samantha realized that she only had one chance to save them. She turned on the ignition, put the car in reverse, and hit the gas pedal, nearly colliding with one of her attackers lurking nearby. The car roared backward, and the sudden movement caught the criminals off guard. Samantha and Emily, unable to believe their eyes, raced away from the gas station, tires squealing in protest. The blinding lights of the gas station grew smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror as they left the crime scene behind them. Heart pounding, adrenaline rushing through their veins, Samantha and Emily drove 4 miles, running on gas, and finally found another gas station. This time they were more cautious and made sure the place was safe before filling up. From that point on, they decided not to stop again until they reached their intended destination, wanting to forget about the scary encounter as soon as possible. The road stretched ahead, an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing over the horizon. It was a sunny day in Portland, Oregon, and you could feel the excitement in the air. My aunts, Sarah and Emily, and I were embarking on the trip of a lifetime to visit our grandparents in Canada's remote Northwest Territories. The journey of nearly 3,000 miles promised adventure, laughter, and the joy of reuniting with family. As we left the bustling city behind, the landscape gradually transformed. Tall pine trees were replaced by skyscrapers, and the highway became a winding path through dense forests. Most of the way we drove along long, lonely highways where the only companions were the whispering wind and the occasional passing car. To amuse myself during the long drive, I had the brilliant idea to bring along a book called Unsolved Mysteries. There was something about reading about unsolved crimes and mysterious occurrences that made time go faster. Sarah and Emily didn't share my enthusiasm, but enjoyed reading about missing airplanes, haunted houses, and unsolved murders. The first night on the road found us at a remote campground deep in the woods. We parked our van in a secluded spot, hoping to get a good night's sleep before continuing our journey. The campground was eerily quiet, with only the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. I decided to sleep in the front passenger seat so I could be closer to the steering wheel when we continued on in the morning. The night air was cool and I wrapped myself in a cozy blanket, trying to shake off the anxious feeling. In the night, I was awakened by a faint noise. It was the sound of footsteps, quiet, barely audible, but definitely present. My heart raced and I tensed, listening, while my eyes scanned the dark surroundings outside the windows of the van. The trees outside swayed gently in the wind, casting eerie shadows. I held my breath, listening for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. No voices, no footsteps, just the nighttime symphony of the forest. Convinced that I had dreamed it all, I settled back in my chair and tried to close my eyes. But sleep would not come, for an unshakable feeling of uneasiness had settled on my soul. It seemed to me that we were being watched, and this feeling gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. When morning came, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Reluctantly, I looked out the window, half expecting to see a wild animal or perhaps a comrade passing by. What I saw, however, made me wince. On the window pane directly in front of me was the imprint of a face. It was as if someone had pressed their face against the glass, leaving behind an imprint that was very clear. Panic rose up inside me and I realized that someone or something had been watching. US during the night. The morning light highlighted the eerie details, a pair of eyes, a nose, and even the outline of a mouth. I couldn't figure out who or what could have done this or why. I immediately woke Sarah and Emily. Their sleepy eyes widened with shock when they saw the print on the window. Fear gripped us all as we realized the implications of this strange find. We were alone in the campground, or so we thought. With trembling hands, we gathered our belongings as quickly as possible and hurried out of the campground. We never found out who had been watching us at night in the campground, and the unsolved mystery of the face on the window haunted us for the rest of the trip. It was a beautiful wedding in a beautiful countryside setting 3 hours from our town. The bride was radiant, the groom was radiant, and the whole atmosphere was filled with love and joy. I, for my part, drank more champagne and cocktails than I should have. My boyfriend, responsible as always, abstained from alcohol to ensure a safe journey home. As we started the drive back, I reclined in the passenger seat, intoxicated and sleepy, and the soft hum of the car engine lulled me into semi-consciousness. Dark, winding country roads stretched ahead, lit only by the car headlights that cut through the impenetrable blackness. But there was something special about this night, an unusual number of sharp turns and steep climbs. I squinted, trying to focus my eyes on the road, and only then did I notice her. Bright headlights, piercing the darkness, were rapidly approaching us. As the intense rays of light washed over our car, I covered my eyes and muttered a pitiful phrase. At that moment, my boyfriend, the epitome of composure and stoicism, burst out screaming. His voice was unlike any I'd heard before, deep and guttural, as if he were wrestling with an otherworldly fear. He swerved the car toward the curb, narrowly avoiding a collision with the ditch. I woke up abruptly, panic slamming into my veins. "What? Are you okay?" I stuttered, my intoxication suddenly replaced by absolute sobriety. He was shaking, his face pale and his voice strained. I saw a huge truck coming straight at us. In the dark, I thought we were going to die. I looked at the road behind us, my heart pounding frantically. The road stretched in a long straight line, disappearing into the night. There were no houses, no streetlights, and most importantly, no sign of a truck or other vehicle. No taillights, no glowing taillights, nothing but the impenetrable darkness of night. And no sound, no engine roar, no squealing brakes, just an eerie silence. I couldn't understand what had happened. At first I thought it was from fatigue or my boyfriend falling asleep at the wheel, which was horrible in itself. Perhaps it was a mirage, a deception of vision caused by alcohol and the dim lighting of the country road. But he was adamant. He claimed to have seen a huge truck rushing toward us. He vividly described the headlights shining like two beacons, the looming silhouette of the vehicle and the deafening roar of its engine. His hands were still shaking as he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. Looking around, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We were on a narrow country road with no room to pass, especially for a massive truck. It was out of the question for a car of that size to pass us without colliding. Furthermore, I realized that I didn't feel any shaking or vibration of the vehicle. That unmistakable sensation that should accompany a collision with such a massive vehicle. It just didn't settle in my mind. As we sat in the car, feeling the tension, I strained my hearing, trying to hear any distant sound of a truck or car, but there was nothing. Only the rustling of leaves in the night wind. The eerie silence was broken only by the rapid beating of our hearts. My memory was hazy, however, clouded by the residue of alcohol. But one thing I remembered clearly was that a flood of headlights, blinding and painful, burst into my half-closed eyes just before my boyfriend went into a panic. The memory sent a shiver down my spine. Several hours passed and the encounter still lingered. Finally, we reached the city and our journey continued in silence. My boyfriend was still haunted by the image of the ghostly truck, his once confident demeanor shattered by the inexplicable encounter. We never spoke of it again, but the event remained in our memories as a mystery beyond explanation. To this day, I wonder what we really encountered on that deserted country road.